August 1609, Padua, Italy. The night was starry and brilliant. Galileo, a scientist, went outside to his backyard garden. He was carrying a newly constructed telescope. Galileo had been meticulously polishing the lenses for weeks. His telescope could now magnify objects several times their original size. Galileo raised the telescope's aiming point. Amazing sights that nobody had ever seen before suddenly came into focus. How were they able to? The unaided eye was unable to see these things. Galileo spent the following few weeks using his telescope to explore the skies. He was amazed by what he saw. From the surface of the moon, mountains emerged. Stars formed from indistinct areas in the sky. Moons whirled around Jupiter. However, Galileo ran into problems as a result of his discoveries. His observations persuaded him that the sun, not the Earth, was the center of the universe. In 1609, this was an unusual concept. For many years, people believed that Earth was circled by the sun, and every planet once every day. This was also the view maintained by the Catholic Church. In Italy, during Galileo's lifetime, the Church held great power. It was known as the Inquisition and had its own court. Anyone who talked against the Church's beliefs may be arrested by the Inquisition and put on trial as a heretic. Heretics occasionally suffered from torture or even died. Galileo was conflicted. He himself was a devout Catholic who adhered to the principles of the Church. Still, his own eyes told him a different story. This truth would be fatal to him. Chapter 1. Childhood. The Italian city of Pisa hosted Galileo's birth on February 15, 1564. His entire name was Galileo Galilei. It had a musical ring. However, the renowned scientist was only recognized by his first name. In this way, Italy paid tribute to its most renowned residents, one of whom being the painter Michelangelo. Galileo's last name was omitted from his publications, and he is still just listed as Galileo in encyclopedias today. The Renaissance was an exciting time in history when he was born. In the air was discovery. A resurgence of interest in the arts and sciences was causing an explosion in Europe. William Shakespeare, an English writer, was born in 1564. Michelangelo passed away. Both of these men are remembered as Renaissance geniuses, along with Galileo. The invention of the printing press in 1454 made it possible to make books in large quantities, as opposed to copying each one by hand. As more books were published, more people started reading. Artists like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci produced beautiful paintings, sculptures, and architectural designs. With newly developed ships, pioneers boldly set out for undiscovered regions. In 1492, Christopher Columbus set foot on the New World of the Americas. Ferdinand Magellan's crew circumnavigated the world and returned in 1522. One of the first English settlements in North America was established in Jamestown in 1607, when Galileo was 43 years old. Pisa was a stunning medieval city beside the Arno River. Galileo was born into a cathedral that was already 5 centuries old. Located next to the cathedral, Pisa's most well-known landmark stood, or rather tilted, because it appeared as though it would collapse at any time. It was known as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Galileo was the eldest child. His parents were both descended from wealthy Italian families, but that did not imply that the couple was well off. Vincenzo, Galileo's father, was a dedicated musician. He composed music, taught, sang, and played the lute. Vincenzo authored books on music theory as well. His writings caused controversy. Songwriters were expected to adhere to rigid compositional guidelines. Vincenzo, though, questioned the guidelines. He even embellished the scale with notes. The publication of one of his books was attempted to be stopped by old masters. But Vincenzo managed to get it published. "I want to be free to question to find the truth," he uttered. Young Galileo paid close attention. Years later, he would also be audacious and vocal. Galileo was talented from an early age. His curiosity was boundless. He disassembled devices to examine their inner workings. Additionally, he created his own line of innovative moving devices and tiny toys. Galileo also devoted countless hours to his studies of drawing and music. He learned how to play the lute from his father. At that time, this stringed instrument was just as common as guitars are today. Galileo developed a lifelong passion for playing the lute. He picked up perspective drawings from tutors, which gave the impression that the objects were three-dimensional. He worked at drawing scenes and objects until they were flawlessly realistic. Galileo's artistic abilities would come in handy in years later. Galileo's family moved to Florence when he was 8 years old. Vincenzo played music at the royal court, which was a fantastic new job. After staying in Pisa to study under tutors, Galileo went to live with his family. Living in Florence was an exciting experience. During the Renaissance, the city was a hub for learning and the arts, and served as the regional center of Tuscany. Vincenzio's position at the palace allowed the family to interact with princes and dukes. Galileo was sent to a monastery at the age of 11 to start school. He learned all that a well-educated person in the 1500s needed to know from the Catholic monks there. Latin and Greek were languages that Galileo studied. Additionally, he studied the antiquated discipline of logic, which taught him how to deconstruct and methodically solve challenging issues. Galileo also researched religion. He was so fascinated by it that he decided to become a monk. His father was shocked by the concept. Galileo was expected to provide for his family one day, because he was the oldest son. That was beyond the capabilities of a lowly monk. Vincenzio swiftly removed Galileo from the convent. Following that, Galileo attended a local school and lived at home. Galileo was prepared for college at the age of 17. Few young men had the opportunity to attend one back then. Typically, only sons from wealthy or aristocratic households could afford to attend. Entry was not permitted for girls, but Vincenzio was committed to providing his bright boy with the greatest education he could. Chapter 2. Insatiably curious, Galileo returned to his birthplace Pisa and enrolled at the university in 1581. Physicians were regarded and compensated generously, so Galileo's dad desired that he pursue a career in medicine. Galileo soon became well known at the institution. It had more to do with his curly beard and reddish hair than that. Galileo enjoyed squabbling over concepts. He doubted everything, but he was ready to learn. His classmates knew Galileo as the Wrangler. Galileo was despised by certain educators. They had never been questioned before, but a lot of educators and learners found his wit to be incisive. Galileo was a kind, devoted, and extremely giving. Galileo's life would be marked by intense reactions from the public. He developed powerful allies as well as formidable foes. Galileo once attended a lecture that completely blew him away. He came to comprehend that invisible laws governed the beautiful order that pervaded nature. Mathematical codes were used to write these laws. Later, Galileo remarked, "We cannot read the universe until we have learned the language in which it is written. It is written in a language related to mathematics. Additionally, the letters are made out of circles, triangles, and other geometric shapes." Galileo dedicated his life to the study of mathematics. He was perplexed by things that others would never even notice. One day, while visiting the cathedral, Galileo noticed a massive lamp suspended from the ceiling by a chain. The chain had just been released by a repairman. It was swinging in mid-air now. It appeared to be swinging in a consistent rhythm, as observed by Galileo. He used his pulse to time the swings. The swings grew progressively shorter. As it turned out, however, each complete back-and-forth swing took exactly the same length of time. Galileo tried out his theory in his room. He wanted to make sure it was correct. Every single time it was. The time it takes for a pendulum to swing wide and quickly is the same as the time it takes for it to slow down almost to a stop. The timing will only alter by lengthening or shortening the chain. Galileo had found a mathematical law at the age of 19. These days it's known as the pendulum law. Unlike in Galileo's day, scientists today constantly conduct experiments to validate their theories. He was the pioneer of the scientific method, a technique that is now known as science. Galileo is regarded as the founder of modern science in part because of this. Galileo's interest in mathematics caused him to get behind in his medical coursework. In any case, he lacked enthusiasm for medicine. After spending 4 years at the University of Pisa, Galileo left in 1585 without receiving a degree. After returning home, Galileo delivered public lectures and gave one-on-one mathematics lessons to students. He continued to perform independent research as well. Galileo sought applications for the new knowledge he was discovering about nature. Galileo resumed his inventive endeavors, just as he had in his youth. He asked himself questions while he researched the properties of water for months. What was the energy that caused objects to float on top of the water? When did waterfalls start to break? He created a pump as a result of his study. It made it easier for farmers to irrigate their crops using water from a river. He then created a brand new scale. The scale had one side in water and the other in air. The scale was adored by jewelers. It revealed to them the precise amount of gold or silver included in mixed metals. Galileo wrote his first book, The Little Scale, as a result of the innovation. His exceptional work became well known throughout Italy. The University of Pisa sent an employment offer to Galileo in 1589 to teach mathematics. What a chance! He had left the university 4 years prior without receiving a degree, and now he was back as an academic. Chapter 3. A unique teacher. There was a disturbance at the University of Pisa because of the new teacher. He declined to don the official professorial robes. The long black togas were meant to represent an honor. Galileo, however, believed them to be pointless and bothersome. He wrote a long, hilarious poem mocking the robes. But university representatives weren't chuckling. Galileo's wages were withheld. The teachings of the University of Pisa were derived from the writings of Aristotle. So did the majority of European universities. Greek philosopher Aristotle lived in antiquity from 384 to 322 BC. His writings addressed several subjects, including arithmetic and physics. He appeared to know the answers to all of the universe's mysteries. Galileo's classroom had to be filled with the concepts of Aristotle. However, he dared to challenge some of Aristotle's beliefs in his own mind. Aristotle asserted, for instance, that heavier items fall more quickly than lighter ones. Nobody had questioned this for nearly 2 millennia. The idea that a hammer would fall more quickly than a feather made sense. However, Galileo had seen that different-sized hailstones struck the Earth simultaneously. He concluded that everything falls at the same pace. Other academics mocked this idea. In any case, who was Galileo to challenge Aristotle? A well-known legend states that Galileo made the decision to test his theory. He escorted a party of academics to the summit of Pisa's Leaning Tower. He carried a 1-pound lead ball and a 10-pound cannonball. According to Aristotle, the cannonball should fall to the ground 10 times faster than the lighter ball. The balls were both lowered from the tower at a signal. The balls hit the ground at nearly the exact same time. Air resistance slightly slowed the lighter ball. Galileo appeared to have established his thesis. However, other onlookers believed that Galileo had just demonstrated his disruptive nature. On the other hand, Galileo's students enjoyed their lively instructor. The majority of his classes were filled to capacity. Professors occasionally attended his classes as well, but they arrived to boo and hiss. Galileo's 3-year tenure at the institution was nearly up in 1591. Galileo quit because he knew he would probably lose his job. Being unemployed at the time was terrible. Galileo's dad passed away not too long ago. He was now required to provide for his mother, his 2 younger sisters, and his brother. How was he going to support his family without a job? Fortunately, a new position opened up soon after. The University of Padua employed Galileo to teach mathematics. Compared to Pisa, the wages there were higher. The University of Padua was also a free-thinking organization. For the self-reliant and intelligent thinker, it was the ideal match. Galileo could not afford to ride a horse when he left for Padua because of his extreme poverty. He covered 100 miles on foot. Chapter 4. The Good Years. As he grew older, Galileo reflected that his years in Padua were the happiest of his life. When he got there, he was 28. Galileo was soon elevated to the position head of the math department at the University of Padua. For the following 18 years, he held the position. Europe was full of young noblemen who came to study at the university. They came home and spread the news about Galileo and his theories. Galileo's stature continued to rise. He also drew a vibrant group of friends to Padua. The brightest thinkers of their era were these ones. Venice was a short distance away. Galileo frequently traveled there via boat to spend the holidays. Venice was a picturesque canal city. People used boats to get around. Beautiful artwork could be seen throughout the city's palaces. Galileo fell in love with Marina Gamba while he was in Venice. It was challenging for Galileo to marry her, as she belonged to a lower social status. Teachers were also expected to remain unmarried and focus only on their careers. Nevertheless, Galileo and Marina enjoyed a lengthy romance and raised a family together. In 1600, a daughter named Virginia was born. Livia, the second daughter, arrived a year later. In 1606, a boy was born and named Vincenzio, after Galileo's father. Galileo adored his time at Padua, but he also almost perished there. On a hot day, he decided to take a nap in an underground chamber with 2 friends. A cold wind from a neighboring mountain cave was pumped into the chamber. A deadly gas from the cave managed to get through the pipes somehow. The 3 men developed severe illnesses. One of the pals passed away the next day. The other passed away a few days later. Galileo managed to survive, but he struggled with poor health for the remainder of his life, often spending weeks at a time in bed. With 2 families now to provide for, Galileo's finances were frequently limited. Back then, the groom received a dowry or wedding money from the bride's family. Galileo's sister's dowry was equal to his annual pay. Fortunately, a few of Galileo's ideas brought him additional revenue. Galileo created the military and geometric compass, a portable device in 1597. The compass resembled two metal rulers covered with numerals. People were able to answer a wide range of difficult math problems by just sliding the compass around. Bankers used the compass to calculate exchange rates for all of the currencies used in European countries. Shipbuilders used it to test scale models of novel ideas before constructing a full-size vessel. Wartime generals used it to organize battlefield troops and determine the proper charge for every size gun. Next, Galileo developed an early thermometer. For the first time, anyone could measure the room temperature. The thermometer, also known as a thermoscope, works by pushing water up a heated glass tube. The higher the temperature of the tube, the more water rose within. Modern thermometers function similarly. Heat draws liquid up a tube. Galileo also continued to conduct major research in physics, the study of energy. He was thinking about falling items again. He understood that all items accelerated as they dropped. But by how much exactly? Galileo was motivated to discover the mathematical rule. Falling through air occurred in the blink of an eye. It was much too quick for anyone to time. So Galileo first had to figure out how to slow down a fall. He achieved that by creating a slope out of a board. He placed strings with bells in equal areas throughout the board. Then Galileo rolled a metal ball down the slope. The bells chimed as the ball passed, allowing Galileo to time how quickly it dropped in a given distance. After hours of experimentation, Galileo discovered a useful law of motion. Falling balls accelerated at speeds of 1, 3, 5, and 7. Galileo named it the odd numbers rule. Galileo repeatedly tested the rule by increasing the slope's steepness. The odd numbers restriction was consistently enforced. In 1609, Galileo received exciting news. A spyglass was designed to make distant objects look closer. Galileo had no idea how the little spyglass would impact his life at the time. Chapter 5. Gazing at the night sky. Eyeglasses have been around since the 1200s. Prior to 1608, no glass was used to magnify distant objects for visibility. Then a Dutch lens manufacturer named Hans Lippershey inserted two lenses inside a tube. One lens arched outward, convex, and one arched inward, concave. The spyglass tube can magnify objects up to 4 times their size. The spyglass was marketed as a toy. Galileo saw its higher significance. The Navy in Venice might use it to detect hostile ships from afar. Venice, a harbor city, boasted the largest navy in Europe. Galileo got to work creating his own spyglass. First, he had to educate himself on how to grind and polish lenses. It was a tedious job. Within a few days, he created a spyglass comparable to Lippershey's. Soon after, he improved it significantly. It has the ability to magnify objects tenfold. Galileo transformed a toy into an instrument of science. People quickly nicknamed it the telescope. The prefix tele signifies far off. Galileo rushed to Venice to present his telescope to the city's senators. They took turns staring out at the water. To their surprise, they observed ships 2 or 3 hours before anyone on shore could see them. Galileo handed them his telescope for free. Galileo was honored with an increased wage and a lifetime tenure at the University of Padua. Galileo improved the telescope by repeatedly improving the glass pieces. By the time he was finished, he had created a device that was 30 times stronger than the human eye. It was time to point his telescope at the stars. One night in November of 1609, Galileo focused his telescope on the Milky Way, a massive hazy patch in the sky. An incredible amount of stars appeared from the darkness, packed close together. During his stargazing, Galileo discovered 80 new stars in the constellation Orion. Prior to the discovery, only 9 stars in Orion were known. Galileo was in awe by the celestial views. "It pleased God to give me the sole witness to a wonderful thing that had been hidden for years," he wrote. Next, Galileo investigated the moon. Everyone at the time believed that the moon was absolutely smooth. This is what Aristotle claimed. Galileo's telescope yielded unexpected results. The lunar surface was rough, similar to Earth's. The scenery consisted of mountains, valleys, and craters. Galileo used his arithmetic abilities to measure the height of the lunar mountains. Every night, Galileo made precise drawings of what he had observed. The photographer photographed the moon's shifting shadows throughout its phases. Galileo's greatest astronomical discovery came just 1 month later. In January 1610, he pointed the telescope toward Jupiter. What 3 brilliant objects were hanging near the planet? Were they stars? The following night, he saw that all 3 objects had relocated. This ruled out the possibility of them being stars, which are known to occur in predictable locations in the sky. Within a couple of days, a fourth object arrived on Jupiter's opposite side. Galileo discovered that the four objects orbited the planet, similar to how our moon circled Earth. He discovered the moons of Jupiter. For more than 1,500 years, no one has discovered anything new regarding our solar system. In just 8 weeks, Galileo discovered several cosmic secrets. They remain the most astounding succession of discoveries ever made by a single astronomer. Chapter 6. The Starry Messenger. Galileo started to work on a book describing his discoveries. His pictures of the sky and moon served as illustrations. The novel was named The Starry Messenger. The title referenced Galileo's new telescope. However, it accurately defined Galileo himself. Galileo authored the book in Latin. This was the language used by scholarly men throughout Europe. That way others outside of Italy may also read it. The book quickly became a big seller throughout Europe. It made Galileo immensely popular. Galileo thought the book would attract wealthy patrons like the Medici family. Renaissance intellectuals valued finding a suitable patron. Patrons contributed money to support their efforts. The Medicis ruled more than just Tuscany. They were also known for being extremely generous patrons. Galileo dedicated The Starry Messenger to Grand Duke Cosimo II. He was the patriarch of the Medicis in Italy. Galileo delivered the book to the Grand Duke, together with the telescope he used to explore the cosmos. Galileo went on to make more discoveries. The four moons of Jupiter were dubbed Medicean stars after the Medici brothers. Jupiter's four moons are now known as Callisto, Io, Ganymede, and Europa. Galileo's charm paid off. The Grand Duke designated him as the chief mathematics scholar and philosopher of the court. Galileo no longer needed to teach. He dedicated his entire attention to research. Galileo left Padua and returned to Florence. In the meantime, his book was becoming a sensation. He disagreed with Aristotle's theories yet again. Aristotle's supporters launched an attack. Some claimed Galileo was a phony who was willing to do anything for publicity. Some stated that his telescope revealed things that were not there. Galileo became frustrated with these scholars. He believed they were locked in their ways. Galileo questioned the authority of ancient Greek philosophers on all topics. In fact, he believed Aristotle could concur with him if he saw through the telescope. Galileo proposed a controversial concept that sparked widespread criticism. The scientist focused his telescope on the planet Venus. Over several evenings, he observed Venus move through phases similar to our moon. Its glow progressed from just a fragment of light to a half circle, then a complete circle. Galileo concluded that there was only one explanation for these phases. Venus must be circling and reflecting the sun's light. The sun and planets moved around the Earth once every day. Galileo believed in what he observed. He was certain that a previous scientist, Copernicus, had the correct notion. Copernicus proposed in 1543 that the sun was in the middle of the universe, with planets orbiting it, including Earth. It was inevitable that this proposal appeared ludicrous. Every day, humans observed the sun traveling across the sky, providing light at daybreak and darkness at nightfall. However, Galileo and Copernicus interpret night and day differently. They proposed that the Earth rotated on its axis once a day. The Earth experienced daylight, where it faced the sun, and night, where it faced away. Galileo was heavily criticized. In 1611, Galileo traveled to Rome to defend his discoveries. He took his telescope to show others what he observed. The excursion to Rome was a success. Galileo was asked to join a prestigious scientific society. The gathering consisted of notable scientists from several nations. They exchanged their most recent discoveries with one another. Galileo began a lively correspondence interaction with his new acquaintances. The church approved Galileo's discoveries about the skies. Of course, they didn't agree with all of his findings. Definitely not. Chapter 7, a very risky matter. The assaults against Galileo didn't cease. They just became worse. Galileo's discoveries challenged long-held beliefs. He said, right, that the sun had black patches known as sunspots. Objects in water floated or sunk based on density, not size. Correct again. His belief that Earth is not at the center of the cosmos sparked controversy. Several scientists published works criticizing Galileo and his beliefs. Galileo fought back. He frequently handled his foes as if they were stupid. "Your ignorance astounds me," he said to one. Galileo had a devoted group of fellow scientists who backed him. They dubbed their opponents the Pigeon League. In a nutshell, bird brains. As the scientists argued, Galileo focused his attention on a pressing family concern. In 1613, he chose to lodge his two young daughters in an order of nuns. Virginia, 13, and Livia, 12, would remain at the order for the remainder of their lives. When both girls reached the age of 16, they became nuns. Virginia adopted the name Maria Celeste. Celeste means heavens. It might have been her tribute to her adored father's astronomy. Galileo's adversaries eventually turned to a new weapon against him, the Catholic Church. They maintained that the sun-centered approach contradicted the Bible. That was blasphemy. Galileo was upset that religion was being brought into the dispute. He was a faithful Catholic who had no inclination to challenge the Church. He believed the allegation of heresy was worse than death. Galileo strongly felt that religion and science had distinct roles. A late Catholic cardinal once said, "The Bible was a book about how a person goes to heaven, not how heaven goes." He used this statement. Galileo submitted a 40-page letter to the Duchess of the Medici family. In it, he explained his views on science and religion. "Holy Scripture cannot be made in error," he declared. But, as it states, interpreters make errors in many ways. The letter was handed from one individual to another. Finally, it arrived in the hands of the Vatican in Rome. The Vatican found the letter innocent. Despite this, Galileo was concerned that his religion was following false teachings. What if the Vatican turns against him? In 1616, he chose to return to Rome. Galileo believed that presenting evidence would persuade the Church of his beliefs. He felt compelled to defend his ideas. "I believe that excellent thinkers, like eagles, fly alone rather than in swarms like starlings." In Rome, Galileo explained his beliefs to everyone who would listen. He was brave and confident. The envoy from Tuscany became concerned about Galileo's safety. "He will get himself into trouble with the law," the ambassador said, "since he's headstrong and really heated up about this." The Vatican resolved to assemble and settle the matter. Galileo was asked not to share his theories. The Vatican quickly rejected Copernicus's thesis, calling it silly and ludicrous. The Earth was at the core of the cosmos. The inquisitors requested that Cardinal Roberto Bellarmine notify Galileo of the ruling immediately. Bellarmine was referred to as the Hammer of the Heretics. In 1600, he assisted in the execution of Giordano Bruno, a heretic. Bruno was burnt alive at the stake. Cardinal Bellarmine approached Galileo with reverence, his crimson hat in hand. He became harsh when he talked of the Inquisition's decision. Galileo could no longer hold nor defend Copernicus's worldview. Bellarmine cautioned that doing so would be extremely risky. Galileo's concerted efforts to persuade the Church were thwarted. He came home censored. For the following 7 years, he ignored the Inquisition's admonition and focused on other scientific fields. Instead of seeing from a distance, he created a microscope to study microscopic insects in detail. He admired several microscopic creatures, including the flea, gnat, and moth, which he described as both dreadful and lovely. Then in 1623, some great news arrived. The Catholic cardinals chose Urban VIII as the next pope. Pope Urban VIII was not just more sympathetic to science, but he also admired Galileo. He had even composed a poem thanking the scientist. Galileo did not wait long to give Pope Urban VIII a visit to the Vatican. Chapter 8. A masterpiece. Galileo saw Pope Urban VIII multiple times during his 1624 trip to Rome. The two took a stroll in the gardens of the Vatican, discussing astronomy. Galileo inquired about the possibility of lifting the ban on Copernicus. Urban, who opposed the prohibition as a cardinal, refused to repeal it. The Pope embraced Aristotle's principles. Despite this, he viewed writing on Copernican theory as beneficial for debate. He cautioned Galileo to convey the notion as untested. Galileo came home and immediately picked up his quill. He created 3 characters that are close companions. They meet for 4 days to argue a hot topic, which is at the core of the universe, the Earth or the Sun. Sagredo, a friend, serves as the host and stays impartial in the disagreement. Salviati, the second companion, represents Copernicus's point of view. Simplicio, Aristotle's companion, supports his beliefs. Galileo was aware that the name Simplicio sounded similar to the Italian term for a simpleton or stupid. Galileo wrote in Italian rather than Latin to make the book more accessible to common readers. He made his points as simple to grasp as possible. In the margin, he included comments and sketches. His writing was funny and easy to read. The final publication was called Dialogue Concerning the Two Main World Systems. It was a literary and scientific masterpiece. Galileo completed writing the book in 1630. He spent 5 years writing the book due to frequent illness. However, there was one last hurdle. He had to bring the book to Rome's church censors for permission prior to it being published. The outbreak of the plague then abruptly halted everything. The plague was a lethal disease that killed millions of people in Europe over the course of centuries. The epidemic of 1630 struck Tuscany. Panic set in. The illness spread extremely rapidly. To prevent the spreading of the plague, the authorities quarantined those who were ill. Galileo never got ill. However, he lost communication with Rome. Roads were closed to practically everyone. Rome authorized clergymen in Florence to study his work, which was later approved. In 1632, the book was ultimately published. The work was well received by Galileo's supporters, but criticized by his opponents. Galileo felt he had followed the rules by arguing all sides of the subject. But any reader might see whose side he supported, that of Copernicus. Pope Urban's reaction to his work was unexpected. He shifted sides and turned against Galileo. What exactly had happened? There was a religious war raging throughout Europe between Catholics and Protestants. The Pope was compelled to take a firm stance against anyone who opposed the Church. Galileo's adversaries complained to the Pope that the book mocked him. It attributed the Pope's statements to Simplicio, an idiot. Angry Pope Urban directed the Inquisition to examine Galileo. The church officials promptly summoned the scholar to Rome. Why? To stand trial. The charge is blasphemy. Galileo's physicians claimed that he was too unwell to go. The Inquisition offered two options: come voluntarily or in chains. Chapter 9, on trial. Galileo was 70 years old when he came to Rome for his trial. The Pope might have imprisoned Galileo. However, out of regard for his age, he permitted Galileo to reside at the Medici embassy in Rome. The ambassador welcomed him like an honored guest. The Inquisition didn't. The court judges were patient, but their inquiries were direct and tough. The trial would go on for a duration of 10 weeks. However, Galileo appeared before the court for only 4 days. The first day of questioning occurred on April 12, 1633. The judges accused Galileo of promoting Copernicus's views in his book. Blasphemy. They believed that Galileo willfully defied church directives sent to him during his previous visit to Rome in 1616. The Inquisition had uncovered its records from that period. According to the records, Galileo was advised not to promote or defend the Copernican theory. The records shook Galileo. The admonition went beyond what Cardinal Bellarmine had told him in 1616. Galileo insisted that he was not guilty. In his own defense, he presented the judges with an official letter from Cardinal Bellarmine. It was composed in 1616. Galileo saw the letter as permission to discuss the Copernican theory. He maintained that his book achieved just that. However, the judges kept their own records. By day's end, Galileo was gravely upset. The Inquisition clearly wanted to punish him. A few days would pass before the second hearing. Meanwhile, church authorities reviewed the book again. Did it or didn't it support Copernicus? It very certainly did, they agreed. According to one critic, Galileo considered non-Copernicus followers to be mental dwarfs. It is evident what he intends. On day 2 of the interrogation, Galileo ceased pushing his argument and started to apologize. He had realized how dangerous his situation was. Despite his best efforts, he was unable to persuade the Vatican of his innocence. He was elderly, in terrible condition, and scared. Galileo acknowledged that his writing had gotten out of hand. He admitted to overstating his support for Copernicus. On the third day, the Inquisition issued Galileo's sentence. Guilty, the judges informed Galileo that he had committed blasphemy and must face the consequences. In a nutshell, he may face torture or perhaps death as punishment for his crimes. The justices permitted Galileo to avoid harsh punishment if he proclaimed Copernicus incorrect. Galileo's confidence was shattered. He did not wish to rebel against the Vatican. He did not want to endure torture. On June 22, 1633, Galileo appeared in court for the fourth and final time. He donned a long white robe, indicating that he regretted his crimes. Galileo sank to his knees. He started reading a court-prepared statement. I, Galileo, son of Vincenzo Galilei of Florence at the age of 70, reject the fallacious belief that the sun is stationary and the earth moves. The Inquisition punished Galileo by encouraging caution and setting a good example for others. His declaration was to be publicly placed in all universities. His work, the dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, was prohibited and all copies were burnt. Galileo was also unable to publish any other works. Then came the most severe penalty of all. Galileo was condemned to house arrest for life. What was it like for a scientist to tell lies about something they knew to be true? Galileo was about to face much more suffering. Maria Celeste, his adored daughter, died on April 2, 1634, following a brief illness. She was barely 33 years of age. Galileo struggled to sleep and eat for several weeks. "I always hear my lovely daughter calling to me," he explained. "She was a lady with an excellent mind, uncommon goodness, and the most emotional affection for me." Chapter 10, The Final Years. Galileo spent the final 8 years of his life confined within his home at Arcetri. He yearned for the lively social life he formerly had. He signed the letters he wrote from his prison. He stated that he felt ripped from the pages of existence. Nonetheless, his residence remained filled with guests. Galileo's students and son joined him in his studies. At one time, his sister-in-law moved in with her 4 children. Famous figures from other countries, such as England's poet John Milton, have also paid visits. Returning to work may have been the most effective way for Galileo to regain his morale. Years before, he had studied movement. Yet, he had never published his work. He revisited previous tests and expanded on his findings. His research on pendulums inspired him to create a more efficient clock. Previously, the most accurate clocks were 30 minutes off every day. Galileo's final work on the mechanics of movement and matter was illegally brought out of Italy and distributed in Holland in 1638. Discourses concerning 2 new sciences established essential foundations for future scientists. 50 years later, Isaac Newton was motivated by the text to develop the law of gravity. Galileo became blind as he grew old. He once saw a bright new world through his telescope, but now he lives in darkness. Nonetheless, he continued working by narrating to his students. Galileo died on January 8, 1642. He was 78. His legacy lives on. Galileo's collection of work had a profound influence on science. Albert Einstein referred to Galileo as the founder of modern physics, and more broadly, modern science. Galileo was a true polymath and a man of many talents. He was a mathematician, philosopher, and inventor. He excelled in the fields of both astronomy and physics. Additionally, he was a talented writer and artist. In the 1700s, the sun-centered concept of the solar system gradually gained acceptance. In 1835, the Church removed the prohibition on publications by Galileo and Copernicus. In 1992, Pope John Paul II expressed remorse for the Church's failings with Galileo. The Pope acknowledged that turning astronomy into a religious issue was incorrect, notwithstanding the Church's good intentions. This was exactly what Galileo had indicated 350 years ago. Galileo has received several accolades throughout history. NASA, the US space agency, provided the greatest homage. In 1989, NASA sent a spacecraft to examine Jupiter. What's the spacecraft's name? The Galileo Orbiter.